Hello and welcome back to 4th Age Guides. In this video, we're looking at the Chiefdom of North Rhun on the battlefield, what you can expect, what kind of units they can train. And we've got a sample battle here on a custom battle map against the dwarves, actually. They're approaching us. Now, we've got the Mount Doom battlefield here. I wanted a sort of a mountainous terrain, but there was no snowy custom battle map, unfortunately. And it is unfortunate because all of your native units, something you'll definitely want to remember when playing this faction, all of your native units get a combat bonus in the snow. I believe that translates to something like +6 to their melee attack. So it's not going to necessarily do anything for your skirmishers or slingers if they're out of melee, but for your infantry corps, for your cavalry even, that is going to play a large role. So you'll want to arrange your fights to take place during the winter when possible. So attack during the winter when it's snowy. Try to, mostly focus on conquering snowy territory, so at least you have that good chance of defending it when the weather is in your favor. Because combat bonus in snow is basically unique to your faction. No one else really gets as widespread of that benefit as you do. Another thing unique to North Rhun is this signature unit, perhaps for them, the Great Axes of Rhun. This is not quite a unique unit. Technically, the Chiefdom of Rhun can also train them, but they need to conquer some territory, and they need to build a specialization building. You can just get these guys in your homelands after building a Tier 3 barracks, which you can do basically from the first couple of turns of the campaign. And I would highly recommend them, get a lot of them, because they're going to be really a key unit for your faction, especially if you go against heavily armored infantry-focused factions. They're not going to be so essential when you're fighting Dale, because Dale has a lot of ranged units that can do a lot of damage to these guys since they lack shields. But in melee, the armor of this unit, the fact that they can warcry, the fact that they are effective against armor, their good charge and melee stats, those are all going to be very telling if you train them en masse. Here I've brought, I think, 6 units of the Great Axes of Rhun, and so the hope is to kind of get a good war cry in and then charge them down the hill to start doing some damage to those heavily armored dwarven units. Backing them up here, we have some Spearmen of Rhun. This is another very iconic unit. I love the look of these guys. So they are, in some ways, extremely basic. They don't have any special abilities like war cry or shield wall or anything like that, but they are rock solid for your faction. They're not toe-to-toe with the Dunedainic kingdoms or anything like that, but they're going to hold off infantry like nothing else, and cavalry, of course, as you would expect. And they've got, I believe, the highest defense of your native roster. So you'll definitely want to train these. This is also a Tier 3 unit. I've brought just 2 units for the flanks here because the dwarves don't have a lot of cavalry. But these guys are going to be useful just for holding position. And they're going to be a lot more sturdy than the next unit down, which is your Axemen of Rhun. So this is another very common unit. This is available at your Tier 2 military development buildings. You're going to be relying on these guys a lot through the campaign. They do have war cry, so that's very nice. It allows them to increase their attack by, I think it's 9 or 10 for 30 seconds after they've triggered that war cry. They also have some pretty decent defense, pretty decent numbers in the unit, so that they're going to perform pretty well, for a Tier 2 unit. The problem is that they will take a lot of losses if they remain in combat for a long time. So you're going to find that you'll be retraining them a lot. And given your strategic position with a lot of far-flung settlements, it'll be difficult to do that. So this is why you want some of your higher tier stuff to avoid the retraining. In terms of ranged, we've got a couple of units that are very important. Slingers and skirmishers. So here's the slingers. They are your native troop. This is unique, actually. Rhun can't train these unless they conquer some of your territory and build a specialization building. And you'll be relying on these a lot. So they're not longbowmen, of course, by any stretch, but they have shields, which means that they're going to be better in those kind of archer duel situations. And they are going to be quite effective. So here's the dwarves' approach. We're getting a war cry in, and we're retreating our skirmishers away. The dwarves, of course, are slower than any of our units, and so we're going to be able to kind of dance around them and get our troops around to do some flank shots, like here. We're going to be able to shoot into the sides and the flanks and get some nice charges down. The skirmishers are another great unit to have. I think this is just a Tier 1 unit. The slingers are Tier 2, skirmishers tier 1. Now, of course, skirmishers in vanilla Rome or Barbarian Invasion tend not to get a lot of use because they're shorter range, but in this mod they are almost always an excellent choice. They can do a little bit of melee flanking. They have shields, so they're going to stand up better to ranged attacks. They are typically pretty effective even against armored troops, especially if you can get some side or back shots in. And so they're going to have the speed to kind of outpace and move around some of these very heavy but well-armored dwarven troops. In terms of cavalry, North Rhun is somewhat lacking. They do have some cavalry, but I don't believe I brought any to this fight. The unit that they have, let's see, well, we don't have the low-tier stuff. The unit that I did not bring, we'll see shortly when we look at the custom battle screen, is Eastland or Mountain Raiders. It's basically a tier 1 spearman unit that's been mounted on a horse. And you're definitely going to want to train them, but for this fight, I knew they weren't going to be very useful. The Mountain Raiders are a tier 2 cavalry unit, and there's a lot of them. But when you're fighting the dwarves, you're going to want something a little more robust. And so to that end, I've brought a couple of units of Chief's Men. This is not something that's out of your native roster. These are available in Northman territories, such as Dorwinian, such as Dale's homelands. So if you start conquering into that territory, which you should fairly soon, you're going to find Chief's Men, and I highly, highly recommend them. They are pretty well armored. They've got a spear for a good charge. They've got a shield. There we took out the enemy general. And they have actually a club for melee. They've got a decent unit size as well, so they're going to perform quite well in melee even after the charge. An absolutely great unit to bring with you, and I thought they would hold up a lot better in this fight against the dwarves. Your general's unit, your bodyguard for all of your family members, is going to be a chieftain's guard. This is the same as what you'll find in the Chiefdom of Rhun. So it's a mounted swordsman unit with javelins as well. So the javelins are very important for giving this unit a bit of extra punch. They're not excellent in melee, but they are going to be very crucial to your early battles especially. And of course they're going to be important for really throughout your campaign. So here what we're doing is we're just throwing in the spearmen to hold off these dwarven axe throwers, and then we're going to charge in the cavalry here to hope to make something happen. We're going to take a lot of losses, but since the enemy has gotten utterly tired at this point, or very tired, and they've lost their general, we're hoping to rout some of these units and benefit from the push effect of our cavalry charge. Now, yes, some of our units are routing. The great axes, again, you can expect that a lot of your infantry is going to be very good in the initial attack, but is going to suffer if you leave it to stand around in the fight for a long period of time. I think we're going to be able to rally some of these guys later, but you do want to be careful with that. Now, we've got a lot of heavy dwarven units. What did they have? Some Dwarves of the Iron Hills here. You can see that we lost quite a few of men in this particular fight as well. These are just dwarven axes. The units that are going to stick around the longest are going to be these guys, the dwarven long axes. And very, very tough. I wouldn't necessarily recommend charging them with cavalry like I just did, but at some point you kind of run out of options. And so you want to get in some charges with anything to do some damage. The thing is, the long axes are not necessarily that durable in the long run. They are somewhat vulnerable to ranged attacks, and if you've got some armor-piercing units like I do here, my great axes are winning slightly in this fight, so we are doing some damage to them. You can see we're causing some losses right here, which is great. Cavalry, again, is taking some losses, but we are able to charge in, do some damage, pull out, and repeat. The axe throwers are another dangerous unit to worry about, and we're just kind of holding them with the spearmen. We're definitely going to lose this fight, but we'll hold them long enough to get our other units in play. For example, the Axemen of Rhun that can kind of do some flanking, and then if we can deal with what's left over here, we can eventually get our other units in to that fight. Over here, we are eventually going to rout the last of the dwarven long axes, and we've got a couple of units here, some Axemen of Rhun, and 48 great axes that are still left. That's a good unit size remaining. So we'll be able to bring them around, maybe get them rested up for a little while, and then hack in to the remaining body of the dwarves here. A very long battle, this one, so I think I'll maybe speed up the action here so you can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm not just kind of rushing them in quickly. You can see I'm just walking them here because they're very tired. But at a certain point, we do get routed. We're going to have to keep throwing our men in. We'll even throw in our skirmishers against these dwarven bows and our slingers too, because they're all out of ammunition. But you can see they're not faring terribly well. However, there are enough of them to at least wear down the enemy, kind of tie them down. And a dwarven bow unit is not super strong, so we are actually able to get some losses there. However, elsewhere in the field, doing okay. We did manage to rout those dwarven axe throwers, but we still have a couple units of the long axes here. We're just kind of holding them again with our spearmen. I think we've got these guys in guard mode to try to preserve their fatigue. We've got the great axes and the axemen over here, finally giving them a war cry order and then going to be charging them in, probably at the same time as we pull out these chief's men. And again, we still got enough men in these units. We did lose quite a few in this one. This is down to 18 from 48. This is still at 35. So we're just bringing them back up to rest a little bit and get in a nice formation before we can execute another charge. Now these long axes are down to 17 dwarven bows, 14 long axes up here, and 20 up here. So still a lot of work to go, but these repeated charges are going to have an effect. Let's get that sped up again. Now remember, a lot of these units are just skirmishers and slingers, and this is not the kind of punishment that they're used to, but we kind of have to work with what we've got. And with those long axes seen off, we're able to get our other infantry in play and to charge the remaining units. And I think, yeah, that should be the end of that. Long axes are broken over here. Very nice charge from these great axes of Rhun. They only lost a couple of men from when we saw them last time. And now we can afford to send my Chieftain's Guard in just to see them off the battlefield to make sure they don't rally. And then the other unit has routed. So here's a heroic victory for us, but it means, of course, a lot of losses there. The dwarven units, of course, are not typical for what you're going to fight. And in a campaign scenario, you don't have to fight them very much, but there may come a time, if you're attacking Dale especially, the city of Dale itself, given that the Lonely Mountain or Erebor is so close to the city of Dale, the dwarves will sometimes reinforce their allies if you try to attack Dale itself. So you may have to send an army like this in the anticipation of having to fight the dwarves. So this is how we performed. Casualties inflicted, we did a lot, I guess, for the slingers. Kind of surprising that they did so much damage. But this just points out the importance of ranged, even against very heavily armored troops like the dwarves. We did absolutely a ton of damage with our great axes. And most of that, I think, was not chasing routers. I think most of that was just hacking down dwarven units. So as you can see, it took a long time for them to break. So pretty decent stuff. Now let's go back to the custom battle settings here. And we can take a look at what other units we get when playing as North Rhun. And it's not a ton. As we talked about in the campaign guide video, North Rhun has a very, very basic roster. Its native roster looks essentially like this. At Tier 1, you've got Mountain Warband and Easterling Skirmishers. Now, we did see these guys on the battlefield, but not the Mountain Warband. If you've played Rhun, or if you've played anywhere in the vicinity of Rhun, then you have definitely seen these guys. They're just basic spearmen. They don't get a bonus against riders in particular, but there are 100 of them in the unit size. And again, with just this kind of numbers, you can expect them to do fairly well, especially against low numbers of cav. As long as they don't get charged or flanked or things like that, you can have them doing the attacking, and they'll perform fairly well at least tying up enemy cavalry most of the time, or indeed any enemy unit that's not too large or too elite. At Tier 2, you're going to get your Axemen, your Slingers, and your Mountain Raiders. So again, we saw the Axemen of Rhun, and we saw the Slingers in that battle. I'd say, again, you really want to be training Slingers a lot, but don't neglect the Axemen either. So you maybe want to go for, in a typical army, 4 to 6 Slingers, and a similar number of Axemen with some other stuff to supplement, I guess. It's obviously going to change depending on who you're fighting. If you're going up against Dale, you probably want to lean more heavily on Slingers, because these guys will be absolutely essential for killing the enemy longbows. And that is a consideration. Dale does field a lot of long-range units, and they're going to be an enemy that you will be fighting for quite some time. So Slingers are going to be really important to neutralizing that. But Dale can also train very infantry-heavy stacks full of elite troops, so you'll want to be able to counter them with your own infantry axemen. You don't bother sending tons of mountain warband to face Dale. It's just not going to work. But you're going to want to keep your infantry away from their ranged, and so that's where the slingers come in, and indeed the skirmishers as well. The skirmishers and slingers are to some extent, your cannon fodder. You get them out there, you hope they do a bunch of damage to the enemy, and in fact, massed slingers can do a fantastic job for you. And skirmishers, if you micromanage them carefully, can really take apart or at least reduce some of those monstrous heavy infantry units that Dale or the other factions can send your way. Now, the Mountain Raiders, again, these are not your best cavalry, but they're what you've got to work with for the first 2 tiers of military development, so you do want to train them. I'd say around 4 units is what I would send in to a typical stack. And you get them massed up together, and they're going to perform surprisingly well. They're fairly cheap, but you don't expect them to sweep aside your enemy in a glorious cavalry charge. They're more for taking out isolated units of enemy cavalry or archers in the back line, and then sort of circling around to deliver a charge into the rear. At Tier 3, this is where you get your elites like the Spearmen of Rhun and the Great Axes of Rhun, both of which are absolutely essential. You want to rush to the Tier 3 barracks as soon as you can if you're doing a campaign and start training. I would prioritize Spearmen of Rhun initially. Get a few 2 to 4 units in an army as you can afford it. And then maybe a couple units of Great Axes as well. And you want to keep these guys back from your front line. So you saw in the battle that we just saw, I had these Great Axes fairly out front. I was using them to lead the charge. That's not what I would normally do, but because I was fighting the dwarves in that battle and they don't have a lot of skirmishers, and I knew I was going to be able to get the downhill charge, I was willing to risk it. Typically, my front line would consist of mostly Axemen of Rhun, with some Spearmen of Rhun as well, and I would have my Great Axes kind of in the back, maybe near the flanks, so that they could do some war cry and do some flank work. You don't want them to be shot at because they're going to take losses, and it's going to be very frustrating because they're an elite unit. It's going to take a while to get them retrained. Of course, another native unit for you is the Chieftain's Guard, and not a lot to say about this. You can train these out of your capital if you get up to the highest level of barracks, but typically you don't need to. You'll have enough family members to manage that. Now, in terms of other units you can get outside of your homelands, probably the first one you're going to find is your Chief's Men, and we saw those on the battle doing quite a good job, especially considering what they were up against, some of the most elite polearm units in the game. So Chief's Men, again, they are similar in some ways to the Mountain Raiders, but notice the upgrade in terms of defense and charge as well. So they're going to be a superior version. They're going to be more costly and a slightly smaller unit size, but well worth it, I think. They perform very well indeed. Another unit, probably the next one you're going to be able to find in your travels, is the Retainer Wains. You can get these in Rhune's territory. So this means if you conquer to the east and then go south a little bit, so pretty much anything to the east or south of the Sea of Rhun. The nearest settlement you can get these would be Raycoast, but practically, probably the first place you'll be able to train them is Tham, because that place is already well advanced. Now, you only need to get to the 3rd tier of military development, but that does require a military policy. And if you're looking at a settlement like Raycoast, you may be more inclined to set that towards financial policy because it does have a nice port and or port access at any rate, and it does stand to make a lot of income in trade. So you may not be able to train your 3rd tier military stuff there if you go that route. But in any case, Retainer Wains, I love this unit. I love it mostly for aesthetics and because it's an interesting unit to try to use. They're somewhat unusual. But if you get the hang of them, they're a lot of fun. They're not necessary by any means, but they're very fun and very helpful, especially when you're fighting in Rovanion. If you've got some nice open terrain and you can send them against Rovanian's cavalry, the thing is you want your Wains to be supported by cavalry of your own. So that's either going to be this kind of cavalry, mercenary cavalry, or the Chief's Men, because they will actually suffer in prolonged melee. So you have to keep them moving, and you have to send in the cav or the infantry to support them. So they're not like a like a shock troop necessarily. They're mostly useful for throwing javelins, for attacking enemy cavalry in specific situations with support, because they can shred enemy cavalry. But if they get caught up in a long-term melee, even against cav, they're going to really take losses. I think in my North Rhun campaign, I only trained 1, maybe 2 units of these, but they were useful in the battles where I did use them. A unit that's going to take you a little while to get is Vassal Macemen. And so this is a unit that has a mace, of course. They can also form a shield wall. They are going to be armor piercing with those maces. And so that's a really nice benefit, a couple of nice benefits there. Fairly expensive. Where you get these is around Nirn. So that's right around the Sea of Nirn. That's going to be eastern Mordor, pretty far from your starting position, but you may conquer into that territory. For your victory conditions, you don't need to go that far south at all. But if you find yourself in war against Rhun and they've conquered into Mordor, you may follow them there and eventually be able to train Vassal Macemen. So if you get the chance, absolutely go for it. But the unit that I would kind of think of as maybe the biggest prize would be the Easterling Axe Hurlers. You can get these out of dwarven settlements. So this is a great prize for taking settlements like the Iron Hills, Erebor itself, or Nereg Zigil, which is the dwarven town just to the southwest of the Sea of Rhun. All of those are fairly close to where you're starting, and if you are careful, you can actually sneak into dwarven territory and quickly move to their settlements and assault them and take them. Once you've taken them, you'll be able to hold them because the dwarves don't attack you when you're not on their territory. And once you take their settlement, it's no longer their territory. So unfortunately, they will not try to take it back, in my experience at any rate. But once you get that dwarven settlement under your control, you'll have to convert the population to a mannish population, and you'll want to check the campaign guide video to see a bit more about that. I think I discussed that mechanic there. But then you'll need to build it up quite a bit. But after all that building is done, once you get some population in there, you will be able to train these guys at the highest tier of military development. So this is a sword unit, which is almost unique in your roster. The only other sword-armed unit you have, of course, is your bodyguard. So these are very elite in that sense, got a very respectable attack, a good missile attack because, importantly, they have throwing axes. They also have a war cry, which will basically double their attack, or more than double it, and they've got an excellent defense. So just an all-around fantastic unit, like the others that are native to your roster. They get a combat bonus in the snow. Some other units that don't, though, would be the Vassal Macemen. The Chief's men don't get a combat bonus in the snow, and the Waynes do not. But these guys do, because they're considered to be more part of your own faction, I guess, like settling that dwarven territory. So absolutely get these guys. Now, if you make it your goal to do this early in the campaign, you'll have your best chance of actually seeing them in use, in action, before the campaign wraps up. In my own experience, I didn't get to use them very much. I was basically done by the time I could get them online, but I was a bit slow to go after the dwarves, I think, in my campaign. So in any case, this is it for the Chiefdom of North Rhun. Now, personally, I love rosters like this. The native roster especially is just very basic, but it does what it needs to do, and you learn how to use these units. All of them have their place, even the warband in the initial years especially. But as you continue, you'll have some situations where you can only train these guys, and you'll be thankful for them as you fight the levies of other nations. So a very interesting faction. Most important to just remember to train those spearmen early to supplement your armies and form kind of a solid core in your battle line, so you can have your axemen and your great axes kind of ranging out on the flanks and dealing those strong blows after the war cry. So a lot of kind of micromanaging of abilities, but that's part of the fun. So in any case, I hope you enjoyed this guide to the Chiefdom of North Rhun. Stay tuned to the channel for other guides for other factions. We do have a couple left to go, I believe, or maybe just one. So I hope you've enjoyed, and until the next time, take care, everybody.